Hi, my name is Alita Williams, and I am president-elect of the Rotary Club of Chicago, and I'd like to convene the 5,663rd meeting of our club. And at this time, I'm going to ask Walter Stawicki to come up and do the thought of the day.
Unfortunately, we were trying to find someone else to do the thought for the day, but we didn't find anybody. So guess what? You're stuck with me. Now, I was really trying to think of something good as far as the thought for the day, but history has overtaken us. And today, in another part of the country, we'll have a former president indicted. And the thought for the day is, as Rotarians, because we're not political, but I think we need to think about what's going on. And I'd like everybody to think in terms of how do you apply the four-way test to what's going on today in the country. And it can go either way. So that's my thought for the day for you. Thank you.
Thank you. So in a moment, we're going to have David Doig come up to speak. Everyone in the room, please remember to keep your questions short and succinct. We will do one question per person. I know sometimes we have a hard time with that, but one question per person. And then on Zoom, if you can please type your questions into the chat, and we will go ahead and get your questions too. And at this time, if Eric will come up and introduce our guests.
Thank you, Alita. Since you rang the bell twice, do we have to count that as 2 meetings? The number goes up one more time. Okay. Now, if any of you read the local news at all, you will certainly see David Doig's name at least a few times a month, I would say. There was just a great article this week in Cranes about development on the south side and the secret sauce in Pullman to date. David also came a few years ago. We were trying to remember exactly how many years ago it was, but all we concluded was it was pre-COVID at the very least. So maybe about 3.5 or 4 years ago, to tell us at that time about the work that he was doing down in Pullman. And so I'm excited to hear about the progress that he's made since then. David's 30 years experience lies in community development, real estate, finance, and government. He currently serves as president of CNI. Prior to leading CNI, David worked in a variety of capacities within the administration of Mayor Daley, Mayor Richard M. Daley, just to be clear. David is not that old, including General Superintendent and CEO of the Chicago Park District and First Deputy in the Department of Planning and Development, and initially in the city's Department of Housing. Under his leadership at the Park District, their bond rating improved and the district issued its first revenue bonds. Serving in planning and development, David managed its neighborhood division, which operates city programs to spur economic development and job growth in neighborhoods throughout the city, which obviously positioned him well for the position he's in right now. So with that, please welcome David Doig.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you, Eric. I think if we could go to the slides, I've got a kind of hopefully a relatively quick PowerPoint, and then love to open it up for questions. So to start with, oftentimes I'm addressing real estate professionals or folks that are involved in economic development, and one of the things I want to always kind of do is distinguish a little bit from kind of what we do as community developers, as opposed to what other real estate or finance professionals do. So there are a few distinctives that we kind of highlight as community developers. The first is we are place-based. So we focus on geography. We define an area, it's usually a neighborhood, and we focus on that neighborhood intensely. We use that as kind of our guiding principle in terms of where we focus development, but the idea that we're place-based. The second is asset-based. So we fundamentally believe that all neighborhoods have assets. People wouldn't have lived there, people wouldn't have settled there, there wouldn't be jobs there, there wouldn't be commerce or educational facilities in a place if there weren't assets. Now, neighborhoods have different assets, and oftentimes those assets are degraded, or they're not being leveraged, or they're not being really showcased. The third is in community development, we're community led. So we take our cues, we take our development approach, what we focus on from the community. And we'll talk a little bit about how we've done that in Pullman. The fourth is it's holistic. It's a multifaceted strategy. It's not a single kind of an approach. There are folks that focus on affordable housing. There are folks that focus on education. Others may focus on transportation. As a community developer, we look at it as a holistic and more of a comprehensive approach to rebuilding neighborhoods. The fifth is it's long-term. So this work takes decades. I often say some of the neighborhoods where we work, they didn't get this way in 3 years or 5 years or even 20 years. It's been 40 years of consistent disinvestment that has left our neighborhoods in the condition that they're in. And so the only way we're going to be able to rebuild those neighborhoods is if we have a long-term, really generational kind of approach. And then finally, it's deep. So what we really believe in is you've got to leverage resources, you've got to focus those, and then you've got to really double down and triple down and quadruple down and really kind of make deep long-term investments. Next slide. Go to the next slide. We having are we got to reboot there? So I'll kind of jump ahead. We can move through these pretty quickly. So our organization is called Chicago Neighborhood Initiatives, and we were founded about 12 years ago. We actually came out of a local bank in the Chicago market called Park National Bank. And Park National was acquired by US Bank in 2009. And we became part of Park National. And then in 2010, we spun off Chicago Neighborhood Initiatives as a separate non-for-profit community development corporation out from under US Bank. And so we focus really on neighborhoods that are under-resourced and those that, we focus on neighborhoods in Chicago that are under-resourced or that have suffered from disinvestment. And our mission is really to bring new investment, new jobs, new opportunities to those neighborhoods. So, Spencer, you want to? I don't know if you can. I brought our ace tech guy here, Spencer Tucker. Spencer's one of the CNI staff members. I don't know if Spencer can help with this, but there we go. Okay, so that, yeah, our organization, Chicago Neighborhood Initiatives. You can go to the next slide. All right, maybe not. So we actually, most of our work and what I'll be talking about today is our activity in Pullman. So how many of you have ever been to Pullman or are familiar with where Pullman is, right? Okay, so handful. So Pullman is on the far, far south side of the city. It's many times, if you look at maps of Chicago, they stop at 95th Street because that's where the L stops. But there are 5 more miles of city south of 95th Street. And so oftentimes, you can go to the next slide, oftentimes we talk about the far south side. So there's the south side and then there's the far south side. So Pullman is on the far south side. So we are proximate to communities like Roseland, Beverly, West Pullman, Morgan Park. So we all kind of share this distinction of being on the far south side. We also have gotten involved in other communities, and so we're part of the team that's redeveloping the former Michael Reese Hospital site, which is in Bronzeville. Starting work on that this summer. And then on the west side, we're working in North Lawndale and in Austin, building new homes in partnership with some of the community organizations there. All right, I'll pause. I guess we'll pause for any questions here. Yes. Yeah, so Michael Reese, we are putting in, it's about $60 million of infrastructure right now. So the site was formerly, as you know, Michael Reese, and so we're putting in about 2.5 miles worth of new roadways starting this summer. And then the first verticals, the first actual new construction will be a data center, which will be kind of on the north side of the site. And then we're going to rehab, there's one building left at Michael Reese, the Singer Pavilion. So we're going to be repurposing that. We're thinking right now that'll probably have like a library, like a public library in it, and then we'll use some of the additional space for nonprofit organizations that need kind of incubator space. So that'll start a year from now. Any other questions? Yes. Yeah.
Is he involved at all?
Yeah.
In this, and
Yeah.
another gentleman, Dan Watts,
Dan,
who's also
yeah.
a banker, and
Yeah.
just curious if he's part of your organization also.
So the answer to yes, both is yes. So Mike Kelly was the founder of FBOP Corp, which owned Park National, and actually Mike hired me in 2007. And some of you may be familiar with the story, but Mike made a few investments in Fannie and Freddie, and when those kind of tanked, left the bank undercapitalized. So we were acquired by U.S. Bank in 2009. And then Dan is actually on our board. Yeah, Dan's on our real estate committee. Yes. Yeah. Why a data center in the South Loop? So what's interesting about the Michael Reese site is that the dark fiber for the internet, that kind of pipeline actually runs along the metro tracks. So there's a huge concentration of dark fiber. And so to be proximate, for a data center to be proximate to that dark fiber is a huge benefit. And also its proximity to McCormick Place, McCormick Place actually has a few data centers there. The old Donnelly building is a data center. So there's already a concentration of data centers in that area. It's on the far kind of northeast part of the site. So it's probably the worst kind of like development site in the whole thing. It's up against the railroad tracks. It's on the far north part of the site. So it's not ideal for like residential or office or commercial development. All right, so those are the neighborhoods we work in. Pullman is on the far south side. You can see North Lawndale and Austin. Next slide. All right, so I want to talk a little bit about our work in Pullman. So Pullman has really been where we focused the vast majority of our real estate activity. And the first thing we did, actually, when we were part of Park National, is we bought the old Ryerson Steel site right at 111th and the Bishop Ford. Some of you may be familiar with that site, across from Harborside Golf Course. So when we purchased the site, Ryerson had left. They left in the 1990s and took those jobs and moved them overseas or to other states. And so we purchased this 200-acre site. It was the largest kind of contiguous undeveloped property in the city of Chicago. And we really decided that before we got into actually doing development, using that principle I mentioned in terms of listening to the community and really being driven by the community, that we would focus on a community planning effort. So we took an entire year and basically listened to the community, and there were 4 themes that came out at that time, and this is like 2010, 2011. The first was the need for access to healthy food. So this was the city's largest food desert. People that lived in Pullman and Roseland and West Pullman literally had to drive to the south suburbs or north to Hyde Park to get a bag of groceries. The second need was the need for jobs. So this is kind of in the height of the last recession, and our neighborhood had already suffered significantly when the steel industry left in the 60s and 70s, and we had unemployment rates pushing 30%. So the need for jobs was second. The third was the need for quality recreation, particularly safe kind of indoor recreation. And then the fourth was around affordable housing. So with those, we started to put together a plan, and part of what we wanted to do was to build on the history of Pullman. So how many are familiar with the history of Pullman? Okay, so a few. So next slide. So Pullman plays a very unique role in American history for 3 particular reasons. Pullman was one of the first worker towns. So George Pullman, who built Pullman, was one of these 19th century industrialists who had these kind of utopian ideas of building this very livable, walkable, workable community. And so basically he built a company town around his factory. And it was really one of the first examples of kind of a worker town in America. And architects come to Pullman even to this day to study how the town was organized and how it was laid out. And so we have this rich kind of architectural and urban planning history. The second was Pullman was the site of America's first major labor strike. So in 1893, there was a recession in America, and Pullman made the mistake of cutting his workers' wages, but he didn't cut their rents. And so that caused a labor strike, and there was the U.S. Marshals were called in, 6 people were killed, and we actually have Labor Day today because of the Pullman strike of 1894. So we have this rich labor history. And then the third aspect of American history that runs through Pullman is African-American history. So the first African-American labor union was the Pullman Porters. So Pullman actually hired former slaves from the South. They worked on Pullman rail cars. They were porters. They served the guests that rode Pullman rail cars. And then in the 1920s, A. Philip Randolph, who was a kind of a precursor to Martin Luther King, organized the Pullman Porters and created America's first African-American union. And so there are a lot of prominent African Americans that trace their history back to the Pullman Porters. Michelle Obama's great-grandfather was a Pullman Porter. It was really some of the first Black middle class in the country. Next slide. So just kind of building on that theme of assets, one of the things that makes our region unique is that we have the greatest concentration of public transportation infrastructure in North America. So if you think about our kind of south region, we have 6 interstates that run through Pullman. All 8 of the Class A railroads have facilities in our region, and we have a port that can get commodities out to the Atlantic through the St. Lawrence Seaway or down the Illinois Sag Canal down the Mississippi to the Gulf. And so there's no other place in North America that has that confluence of water, rail, and road that we have in the region. So that is by far kind of our most important and strategic asset. Next slide. So when we began our work in 2010, we wanted to build off of those assets, but we were also realizing that our area had suffered from literally 40 years of disinvestment. We had lost over 100,000 jobs. There were declines in property values. We had high levels of abandonment. There were high levels of unemployment and crime. And so we were confronted with a lot of the kind of social issues that you typically see when areas start to get disinvested. Next slide. So our approach to revitalization, building on those assets, has been to focus on delivering projects that both build off of the assets, but also respond to what the community has identified. So the first project we did, which was kind of our lead blocker, was we developed the city's first Walmart. So this is back in 2012, 2013. Some of you may recall there was a big debate within the city around Walmart moving to Chicago. There was an ordinance that the city council approved, basically prohibiting big boxes. Thankfully, Mayor Daley vetoed that. But Walmart had basically saturated all of rural America and most of suburban America, but they weren't in core urban areas, large core urban areas. So they weren't in LA, they weren't in Boston, they weren't in New York City. And so building off of that, I identified need that the city or the community had in terms of need to access healthy foods and also create jobs. We approached Walmart, and thankfully Walmart at that time was interested in kind of making inroads into urban areas. And so we worked with them. We actually had them sign a community benefits agreement. It's the first time, and I think probably only time, that Walmart ever did a community benefits agreement. But in that community benefits agreement, they agreed to hire 80% of all of their new hires from our zip code. They agreed to $1.50 more in minimum wage than was required. They signed a project labor agreement with the labor unions to build all their new stores in Chicago with union labor. And they made a $25 million philanthropic commitment. And so with that, we developed the city's first Walmart. I know you've all probably seen that Walmart has been closing stores. Thankfully, ours is not one. Ours actually does very well. And in fact, during the riots a couple of years ago, ours was the only Walmart that wasn't looted. And the reason why it wasn't looted was because the community literally stood out in front of the Walmart and pushed the looters back. And so we actually, Doug McMillan, the CEO of Walmart, came a few months after that and thanked the community and the associates that worked at Walmart for standing up for their store. Next slide. So I mentioned the access to healthy foods and the need for jobs. About 4 years after the Walmart opened, the community came back to us and said, it's great, we've got access to healthy food, we've got some retail jobs, but we really need more living wage jobs that you can sustain a family on, that you can send your kids to college on. And so we pivoted and started developing industrial projects. And our first industrial project was with a company called Method. They make hand soaps. You might be familiar with, you can buy them at Target. And they opened a new factory in Pullman. It was their first factory and created about 150 new jobs. And so we followed that up now with another 5 or 6 industrial developments. So we have the Midwest Distribution Center for Whole Foods. We have the Midwest Distribution Center for S.C. Johnson. We developed the city's first Amazon distribution hub that opened about 1.5 years ago. And we've developed 2 horizontal farms for a company called Gotham Greens. So all in, we've created about 2,000 new jobs and coordinated almost $500 million of investment. Next slide. We've also focused on housing. So one of the things, as a comprehensive community developer, we do is not just look at job creation or economic development, but understand that we've got to provide housing options. So our focus has really been on rehabbing historic Pullman row homes. We've done about 50 of those. We also developed the first artist housing in the community that opened about 1.5 years ago, called Pullman Art Space Lofts. And then we've also coordinated other housing development, working with Mercy Housing to redevelop the old Pullman Wheelworks site. Next slide. I mentioned the retail, the Walmart. We also have done some smaller neighborhood retail. So we just opened about 1.5 years ago a new Culver's restaurant. It's the first like sit-down restaurant in the community in 50 years. It's the only Black-owned Culver's franchise in the entire chain. A guy named Baron Waller, and I actually just got his sales numbers a couple weeks ago. He did over $3 million in sales at our Culver's. Our Potbellies is the third highest grossing Potbelly in the entire chain, and we have Chicago's best barbecue restaurant, Lexington Betty. The woman who owns Lexington Betty, her name is Dominique Leach. You can see her on Chopped and the Food Network. She's become kind of a celebrity chef, but she is a phenomenal barbecue chef, and we love to celebrate our barbecue restaurant. We've also done other neighborhood retail and are continuing to promote more local-owned businesses. Next slide. I mentioned the industrial development. You can see we've done the Method Plant, Amazon, Gotham Greens, the Whole Foods Distribution Center. We actually got Whole Foods to move from Indiana to Chicago, which is not a narrative you typically hear. Usually it's people going the other direction, but we put together a pretty attractive financial package and got them to locate in Chicago. Next slide. We've also focused on education. So even though we don't necessarily do the education, we partner with our local schools. We have one of the best public high schools in the city, Gwendolyn Brooks. It's kind of a hidden gem. It's the 8th ranked school in Illinois right now, public school. We also have Poe Elementary, which is a great elementary school. Always ranks in like the top 3 or 4 public elementary schools in Chicago. It's a classical school, and they won a couple years ago, they won the National Blue Ribbon Award. Next slide. Finally, recreation. So I mentioned those kind of 4 things. One of them was the need for indoor recreation. And so about 3 years ago, we worked with the local youth sports programming group called the Roseland Youth Center. And we developed a 135,000 square foot new indoor rec center. It's the largest kind of indoor rec center in the region. They saw over 100,000 visitors in 2019. It went down during the pandemic, but it's now picking back up again. But what is most exciting is we really use the community center as a way to get kids engaged and then help supplement their education. So we have SAT and ACT prep courses. We have tutoring, mentorship programs, and you can see in 2019 we had $7 million of scholarships for kids that came through the community center that they use for college. And we also have 2 Major League Baseball players that actually came through. One of them plays for the Pirates. The other is, I think, for the Cardinals. And so we're training smart athletes. That's what our local Alderman Anthony Beal is totally committed to baseball. And so he says, we want to train smart athletes. Next slide. So I mentioned the national monuments. So this is, Pullman is the only national park in the city of Chicago, and it's only the 2nd in Illinois. Anybody know what the other national park presence in Illinois is? Get a little prize for this one. Lincoln Home, there you go. Nice job, Eric. Most people never, so the Lincoln Home's in Springfield, but we're only the 2nd national park in all of Illinois. President Obama designated Pullman a national monument in 2015. So presidents can actually use their power under the Antiquities Act to designate monuments, but only Congress can actually make an official national park. So at the end of last year, 2022, Congress approved and President Biden signed a bill making Pullman a full national park. So we're right there with the Grand Canyon and Statue of Liberty and the Washington Monument. So we hope over the next, we have about 100,000 visitors a year now that come to Pullman. We hope to grow that to over 300,000 in the next few years as the park starts to mature and grow. Next slide. So over the past, this should say 10 years now, we've created and generated about $420 million of new investment, about 2,000 jobs. So what's most exciting is now to see what the social benefits or social impact of those long-term, deep investments have been. And so we're happy to say incomes are up. We've seen a significant increase in income. Property values are up by about 20%, and crime is down. So crime overall is down, and particularly violent crime is down significantly. So I always kind of knock on wood with this, but we haven't had a homicide in Pullman in about 3.5 years, which is, yes. I have to speak very softly when I say that because it's always iffy. But so next slide. So I mentioned some of our expansion. We're now moving a little farther west into Roseland, which is the next community over. Different challenges in Roseland, but we're trying to use some of those same strategies around building off assets. We have the red line that will be coming through Roseland in the next few years, and so we're starting to kind of plan for that and build kind of these transportation nodes and transit-oriented development around where those new red line stops are going to be. We also have a medical district that was approved a few years back that the state finally approved the plans for, so we're going to be building that out over the next few years. Next slide. I mentioned the Bronzeville Lakefront project. So this is 48 acres just south of downtown. We are working with Sheba Medical, which is it's actually the medical system for the country of Israel. They're called the Mayo of the Mideast. They have agreed to locate a facility on the Michael Reese project, likely bring some of their R&D and some of their startups with them. That's early in the planning. We're making good progress, and then things changed in Israel a few months back. And so being the National Health Service of Israel, there's a lot of politics involved, but we still have their commitment to come to Michael Reese and develop a research and development center there. Next slide. In North Austin, we just finished a new community center there, very much like the one in Pullman. This is actually 150,000 square feet. It's at the corner of Laramie and Bloomingdale, so it's just north of North Avenue. Beautiful brand new facility that is open and hosting tournaments and other kind of special events. Next slide. I mentioned in Lawndale, we're building new homes there. Our goal is to build 1,000 new homes in Lawndale. And then what we want to do is bring that to the south side and build 1,000 new homes on the far south side in Roseland. Next slide. And then finally, we also do small business lending. So we have a subsidiary called Greenwood Archer Capital that makes loans of up to $100,000 for neighborhood businesses. So we've deployed, it's been about $4 million in the last 5 or 6 years. We've helped several thousand small businesses, particularly during the pandemic, kind of stay alive, and now are helping them expand through access to capital. And I think that's it. So that was about 25, 30 minutes. Happy to open it up for questions or comments.
So it's a very impressive record. How does your business model work in terms of your organization? How does it, organize and finance and do all of these things?
Yeah, so we have a staff of about 15, and about 3 of those are dedicated to our micro lending, our small business lending, and then the rest we have a operations staff of about 4, and then we have another 5 that focus on real estate. So our operating budget's about $3.5 million a year, and we generate about 80%, 85% of our revenue comes through fees or recurring revenue. So we are able to generate revenue through our development operations. So we get developer fees. We have properties that we own and manage, so we have rental income. And then the remaining, call it 15%, we raise mostly through either government grants or private philanthropic grants.
Anyone else?
Obviously, there's a lot going on.
Yeah. Yeah.
So 30 years down the road,
Yeah.
how will you say we were successful? In other words, you've already done a lot.
Yeah.
And, obviously crime is down, investment is up. It's almost like you want to be able to walk away from what you did because now the community takes over,
Yep.
and then you go to another spot. But I'll let you answer that.
No, that's exactly right. I think if I had to kind of project, maybe it's not 30 years, but maybe over the next 10 to 15 years, we've done a lot in terms of economic development, but what I would like to see more of a focus on is repopulation. I really think a lot of our social problems are related to depopulation. I mean, we've lost 60,000 people on the far south side in the last 10 years. We lost an entire ward. For those of you that follow it, the 34th ward, which used to be like West Pullman, actually moved downtown because you've had an increase in population in downtown and kind of inner communities, and we've lost 60,000. So we lost an entire ward. And so part of the reason why we're building new homes in these areas is because we've got to repopulate. And I know that's not necessarily the narrative you hear from the press. The press tends to focus on gentrification, right? And certainly there are neighborhoods in Chicago that are experiencing gentrification, but that's probably less than a dozen. The other, there are 77 communities in Chicago. The other, call it 50, are suffering from depopulation. So if you look at the west side or the south side, or even parts of now the southwest side, you're seeing outmigration. And unfortunately, the new population growth is not in those neighborhoods. It tends to be more downtown or the lakefront or kind of inner communities. And so I just think if we're going to deal with some of these larger systemic social issues, we've got to look at repopulating. And then we have examples of that. If you think of the area like around where the United Center is, for those of you, longtime Chicagoans, 30 years ago, you would never think about like walking from downtown to the United Center. Well, people do it all the time now. And part of it is because it's repopulated. So that was an area that, had a lot of public housing, you had a lot of vacant land. And so, so I think when you start to see areas repopulate, the schools get better because you just have more kids. The retail gets better because you have more shoppers. The social institutions, the civic clubs and the block clubs start to kind of grow. And there's a general sense of like things are getting better. The opposite's true when you're depopulating. The social fabric starts to fray, the retail gets worse, the schools get worse, crime goes up. So that's probably way more than you wanted, but I just think it's, if we're going to rebuild areas of the south side or west side, we've got to repopulate. Yes, sir.
So I understand what you're saying is the result, but how do you do that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So part of it is you got to build the supply, right? And so, I don't want to like get too political here, but the city's zoning policy has generally encouraged like more development in already like dense areas, right? And developers are like lemmings. I mean, they just flow to where they can see, more opportunity. And so, of course, areas like Fulton Market and River North, and it's like where you have already dense, it's just like more density. And so I think there needs to be a rethinking of that. And I think some of these areas, like they need to put a moratorium on new development and push more development kind of out. I think also the city has not done much to incentivize people to move to areas of the west side or south side. So I think that the city has 15,000 vacant lots, 15,000 that are basically vacant and have been for generations. Why doesn't the city start to incentivize developers, give away the land, provide some kind of, write down, and really encourage people to move out more into the neighborhoods? I mean, we've got the transportation infrastructure. We've got a great L system. It's crazy when you go on the Green Line on the west side and you get to like the Kedzie stop and all you see is vacant land. Whereas you take the the red line north and all you see is density. It's just we have this huge disparity in terms of how investment is distributed. And I think that leads to the racial wealth gap. I think it leads to, a lot of the social issues that we see. Yes, sir.
At the present time, you depend on grants from the state and institutions and whatnot. Do you think that you will ever be able to be self-sustaining?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are kind of models that we continue to kind of expand on. I mean, we could be self-sustaining today. It wouldn't give us the expansion capital we need to continue to grow. I mean, we could say we're just going to manage what we've got and probably be self-sustaining, but to grow and expand, oftentimes it's taking advantage of those kind of, whether it's government programs or philanthropic programs, to use that, what I would call kind of that at-risk capital, which is really kind of the most, it's the most at-risk kind of capital to look at doing different things. I mean, I mentioned we're building houses on the west side, and that's a reach for us, but because we've got support from the government to do that, that's giving us the enough of kind of the risk mitigation to want to do it.
Thank you.
Yep, thank you.
No, wait a second. Thank you so much. And we want to give you a wonderful mug so that you remember us every
Yes.
time you have your coffee.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for coming
Appreciate
today.
it. Thanks.
Also, on your tables today, you see the wonderful piggy banks. So we are doing a school supply drive for the Jesse White trunk party, and I want to help get that revving up. So if anyone would like to put in any of their extra change or dollars and such. Yes, Betsy. Sure, why not? We'll let Timo know that he's matching our school supply drive. But also, if you aren't able to give in cash today, there is an Amazon link with all the school supplies, and you can purchase whatever you would like, and it will get shipped directly to the Jesse White Center for the trunk drive that we do on July 14th and 15th. And Sarah has some information for us.
Hey, good afternoon. So just a few announcements here. First of all, we had our river cleanup this past Sunday, 2 days ago. And thank you to all of those who came out. We had 14 people come out in that weather. So if you remember what Sunday was like, that's great. So we had 14 out of 17 come clean up the river by kayak. This is an annual event, so we'll look to do it again next June. Alita mentioned the Jesse White Trunk Party, so that'll be our next big service project in July. I have forgotten what the date is on that, but I know someone in the room knows what the date is. July 14th and 15th. So that is our next big service project. So make sure that you pay attention to the gyrator for that. There's also a volunteer opportunity at the Cornerstone Center on June 21st. There are 2 time slots that you can sign up for. 2:30 to 5:30 or 4:30 to 8. And that registration link was also in the gyrator today. And then lastly, I just want to plug one more time the club assembly meeting for next week. This is a great opportunity to catch up on what the club has been doing. A great opportunity to maybe bring some guests, some prospective members, because they'll hear about all the projects that we're doing. And our CPS grant winners will be here. So we had 6 schools earn a grant, and each of them will be represented. Most of them here in person, one on Zoom and one possibly might not be able to make it because she may have jury duty. So we'll keep our fingers crossed for her. But otherwise, this will be the first time that the teachers will be here in person. So we started this program during COVID, so they've only ever been able to participate via Zoom. So they're coming to have lunch with us. So I hope to see the room full again next week. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. All of our, well, she said the club assembly. Please look at the gyrator if you have any other questions. The QR code is on the table for the gyrator. All of our committee meetings are on the website and in the gyrator also. And our next upcoming meeting is the club assembly. And then after that, I believe our next part is my installation, I think. Yeah. So June 20th, we're off for the 4th of July because it's the 4th of July. And then our next meeting will be July 11th. And so as I volunteer somebody today, Andrew, can you come up and lead us in the 4-way test? If everyone could please stand.
All right, everybody. Number 1, is it the truth? Number 2, is it fair to all concerned? Number 3, is it
Goodwill and better friendships
Number 4, will be beneficial to all concerned.
Thank you, Andrew. And with that, I adjourn the meeting.